Hi, my name's Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV. In this episode, we're going to take a look at Polyend's updated little groove box. It's the Polyend Play Plus. Polyend Play Plus is the updated or upgraded version of the Polyend Play, and I featured this one in an episode last year. But the Play Plus has got an upgraded CPU, and that enables it to have 4 synth engines, audio over USB and stereo sampling, which the Play Plus doesn't have. And that's why I featured this in a recent episode, because it's now a fully integrated, self-sufficient system in that you don't need to hook it up to synths if you want to do a little bit of synth tweaking in your tracks. And last year I made this little demo track with the original Play and the Waldorf Blofeld to show how it could be used as a centerpiece of a doorless setup, and it works really well. But as I say, you can't produce any tones internally, only playback and manipulate samples. So now with the Play Plus, you could make this whole track internally. And the Plus is the same price as the Play used to be, but they've reduced the price of the Play. Now it's about £430 if you can get hold of one. It's not been discontinued, they're still making it, so you have the option of one or the other. You want one with synths inside and with stereo sampling, or one without. Nice to have the choice. But before we go into what it does, let's have a little recap of exactly how it works and what it is, because I doubt anyone can remember what it is from an episode from a year ago. What we've got here then is a really interesting little sequencer. It plays samples, it'll play MIDI, and as I said in the intro, it's also got its own synth engines. We access these using different modes on the front panel. Here we're in performance mode, and each of these strips is a different type of effect. If we play something, these are sort of ratchets. These are high pass filters. Got to bring in the tracks. Low pass filters, and different effects like reverbs and delays. And they work on all the sample tracks. If we come out of performance mode, we're now in audio mode. We've got our 8 tracks here. We've got them all selected, which is why they're all blue. If we play, we can mute. We can solo, and we can add variations, and this is the select. And you select the whole track to change parameters across the whole track. Each of these are steps. Obviously, if we hit the step, we can look at what samples being used on that step. So we've got a D&B snare, a D&B kick, a D&B kick, and a D&B snare. So if we just solo that, so unlike most sequencers, each of the little steps in this doesn't have to have the same instrument in it. It's a bit like a tracker in that every single one of these squares here can have a different instrument if you really want. If we press shift and go into MIDI mode, these are the MIDI channels we've got playing. So let's solo one. Bring in the others. And these are from the internal synths. But hit that, we can see this is synth 1. Hit this, it's on synth 3. There's 4 synths available, and you can use 3 at a time in the engine, and we'll look at that in a little minute. But yeah, basically we've got a sequencer, so let's unsolo everything, play it, go into the patterns. These are the different patterns we've got programmed in, but we could program a pattern in every one of these squares, and then we could put variations on each of those as well. So there's absolutely tons of stuff you can mess around with, and it's got randomization features, really interesting randomization features. Let's turn the randomize up. All the different samples in the folder, for example, the sample length, the texture. But let's put the samples in the folder because this is most obvious, and press play. That's on randomize all, which means it'll randomize all the samples in the memory, but you could randomize just kicks, just the hats, just the snares, stuff like that. And I'm just trying to show you really quickly the sort of flexibility of this and the interesting aspects to it. But let's move on quickly to the new stuff, because I did all that last year. So let's move on to the Synth Engines. I'll start by showing you how you use the different synth engines in this. We're in MIDI mode, so these are all purple. If we're in audio mode, they're green. So go back to MIDI mode, hit a square, and then hit the sample. And this now shows us which of the devices we're using. In other words, which of the synths we're using. If we go into the main menu, come to synths, and we can see we've got the 3 synth slots, and each of those slots can pick one of the 4 synths. So in synth 1, we've got the VAP. Let's go to synth 2, because that's what we're using on this step here. And we can see we've got different models we can pick from. There's the ACD, and this is a bit like an SH101 in that you can add different waveforms to the same oscillator. Next up, we've got FAT, and this is like a big super square type of oscillator in that you've got 3 oscillators and you detune them and make really big fat tones. I'll go through all of these in a second. And then we've got VAP, and this is like a 2 oscillator polysynth, like a Prophet 5, a Jupiter 8, a Rev 2, a Prophet 8, that sort of thing, but not quite as complex. And then we've got WTFM, and that's a little 2 operator FM synth for all those metallics and bells and weird grungy tones. You can have any combination of synths you want in there. You can have them all as the same synth, but what you only get is 8 voices. We've got 8 tracks on the sequencer, and each one of those sequencer steps only programs a single note. So we've only got 8 notes that we can program there anyway. We've got 8 voices on the synths. So on each of the synths, you have to say how much polyphony it's got. So if we come into the one we've been looking at, which is synth 2, here we can see we've got polyphony of 1, and we can up that to 4, which means there's another 4 being used somewhere else. And although we've only got 8 different tracks, and each of those steps on those tracks can only record 1 note at a time, we do have a chord mode, which means one of your synth engines can create a chord. Let's find a nice one. Minor 7th, that's pure Chicago house. So I think that about covers how it all works. Let's take a look at each of the individual engines, and we'll start off with that ACD one, which is a little bit like an SH101. And this is just to show you the basics of it really quickly. You can see we've got the different oscillator types: saw, square, sub, and noise. These are all the same oscillator. You can't detune them, but you can add a square to the mix. Let's add some. Let's take the saw out, so it's just a square. Let's change the pulse width of that. So that's how you program it. You select the individual parameters, then you go in and change them. Go to the FAT, and this is the one that I said was like a big super saw or super square. Really interesting. It's not like any hardware synth I've ever come across. I'll start off with a really simple sound. That's adding detuned oscillators, isn't it? And add some brightness. That's adding an octave. Or reduce it, put a sub in. So easy to get nice tones out of this. It's really easy to program a big fat tone like that on this, but you don't have to program anything if you don't want to, because there are loads of presets. And that's the same for all the synths in here. So let's take a look at the next one, the VAP. And this is the one I described as something like a Prophet 5, a Jupiter 8, a Rev 2, a Prophet 8, a Jupiter 6, basically a 2 oscillator polysynth. Let's put the chord mode on actually, because it works really well with these tones. Okay, then finally, let's take a look at the WTFM. And this is an FM synth. Don't have time to describe what FM synthesis is, but essentially you've got oscillators or operators and they modulate each other and create all sorts of crazy tones. On this one, we've got two operators. You see here, we've got the ratio, which is effectively the tuning, and then we've got the shape. So let's change the shape of 2. And that's as simple as it gets, because with FM, you're meant to create the tones and modulate all the sounds and harmonics using modulation. So that gives you loads of gritty, gnarly tones, as well as bell-like things and metallic things. They go a bit higher. Metallic inharmonic weirdness. But if we modulate the FM using an envelope, so let's go down to envelope, well, let's go down to the mod matrix actually, and add some amount. So that's oscillator 1, as it were. So that's oscillator 2, I think, modulating oscillator 1, or the other way around. But being so that's the amp envelope. So that's an envelope controlling the amount of. So that's an envelope controlling the amount of modulation from one oscillator to the other, and that's why it changes over time. So that's one oscillator modulating the other oscillator. So that's one oscillator modulating another oscillator to create different harmonics and changing those harmonics over time, and it sounds a bit like sticking a filter on, and that's what FM synthesis is, essentially. So it takes you into all sorts of crazy territory. Well, let's have a listen to some of the presets. So it takes you into all sorts of crazy territory. But let's have a look. So it takes you into all sorts of crazy territory. But let's take it. So it takes you into all sorts of crazy territory. From nasty, gnarly, as I say, to bells and metallic stuff. So let's have a listen to some of the presets. So there you go, loads of variations on tones, acidy tones, nice big thick rich polytones, big super source, super square tones, and metallic clangs, bells and weird effects. It's all in here. So there you have it, the Polyend Play Plus. It's a great little box. It's got its own quirks. These little boxes all do. But what I find really interesting is that we now do have the choice between one or the other, one with its synth voices, stereo sampling and audio over USB, and you can export stems and things like that, or the Polyend Play, which I found really good as a controller for a little DAW setup. So yeah, the choice is yours. There's about £300 in it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, don't forget you can catch it whenever you like on our Clubbing TV official YouTube channel on the From the Studio playlist. And if you've got any comments, drop them in the comments. I'll see what I can do to answer them. And also, if you are into this, I do have a much more in-depth review on my Starsky Car YouTube channel, so well worth checking that out as well. And I'll see you in the next episode of From the Studio.